Amelia Earhart, a legend in flight. Amelia Earhart, a legend in flight. Focus question. Who is Amelia Earhart and why is she a legend? Introduction. The tiny red airplane bounced among the clouds, 12,000 feet, 3,658 meters above the water. Below, icebergs jutted out of the cold waves. Giant black storm clouds lay ahead. The year was 1932. The airplane carried Amelia Earhart, one of the most famous pilots in the United States. She had been the first woman to ride in an airplane over the Atlantic, although a man flew the plane. Now, if she made it, she would be the first woman to fly an airplane over the Atlantic herself. And she would be the first person, male or female, to have crossed the Atlantic in an airplane twice. But first she had to success, and there was a reason why so few people had made it. The trip was dangerous. Airplanes in the 1930s were small, and they didn't have many of the instruments that today's pilots rely on. A pilot had to go by her sense of sight and how the plane felt, keeping tight control of the airplane for hours at a time. The black clouds ahead were too large to fly around, so Amelia pointed the little plane right into them. The rain soon turned to ice. The plane's controls froze, sending it into a tailspin. As the plane plummeted towards the water, Amelia struggled to get control. Finally, the warmer air below the clouds melted the ice. Amelia was able to pull the plane out of its spin. Many hours later, Amelia sets the plane down in Londonderry, Northern Ireland. She had done it. She had crossed the Atlantic Ocean in an airplane she flew herself. Before this flight, she had already been famous. Now, she would be a legend, but Amelia Earhart would be most remembered for her biggest failure. While trying to fly her plane around the world, she disappeared. Winged machines. The world's first airplane flight occurred in 1903 when Amelia was 6 years old. Two brothers, Wilbur and Orville Wright, had built a winged machine out of wood. They launched it successfully into the air at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. Although many people thought they were crazy, others thought the idea of flying was exciting. It was dangerous, to be sure. Planes were fragile, slow, and low-flying. They did not fly well in bad weather, and many pilots died in crashes. By 1937, airplanes had improved a lot. The first airlines had begun carrying passengers on short routes, mostly overland. Engineers designed better airplanes, and pilots like Amelia had learned to fly them more safely. But accidents will happen. Kansas Youth. Anyone who knew Amelia as a child could hardly have been surprised by her later accomplishments. She was born in Atchison, Kansas on July 24, 1897. She spent most of her time at her grandparents' home with her cousins and friends. They climbed around the banks of the Missouri River. Amelia led expeditions into caves, and she loved to ride horses. She made up games for the children to play in her grandfather's barn. She and her sister, Muriel, were such active children that their mother made bloomers for them to wear. Unlike dresses, bloomers allowed the girls to run and ride the climb just as the boys did. At that time, most girls were not allowed to be so active, but Amelia was determined. Amelia's happy childhood came to an end when she was 11. Her parents took Amelia and Muriel to live in Iowa, but her father couldn't find a job. The family moved several more times. Amelia made very few new friends. When Amelia was 21, her family moved to California. One day she attended an air show. The airplanes dazzled her. Flying in loops and doing stunts after that, Amelia didn't finish college. She knew she wanted to fly. With her parents' help, Amelia took piloting lessons and saved enough money to buy an airplane. Before long, the young woman was flying in air shows herself. Time to fly. When she wasn't flying, Amelia moved in Boston and found a job at Dennison House. It was a place where poor people, especially children, could receive help. She loved her work there and she was good at it. She was making a name for herself, but then the opportunity of a lifetime presented itself. A publicist in New York named George Putnam was trying to find a woman to be the first to ride in an airplane over the Atlantic. It was a dangerous idea. 3 women had died trying to cross the Atlantic the previous years. Only a man had crossed over the Atlantic in an airplane. Anyone who would try it had to be tough as nails in order to withstand the danger and fatigue. George thought Amelia Earhart was perfect and she was eager to go. Amelia Earhart, flyer and in her lifetime, Amelia worked at many jobs. At the time, it was unusual for a woman to have jobs at all. Nurse, social worker, pilot, clothing designer, magazine editor, writer, airline executive, professor. She also helped start the 99s, a group of women pilots that still exists today. Amelia was just a passenger on that 1928 flight. She called herself a sack of potatoes because she felt like she had no purpose. Still, her life would never be the same. The first woman to cross the Atlantic made headlines around the world. After the flight, she was very famous and very busy writing books and giving speeches about flying. She had no time to go back to work at Dennison House. She also designed clothing and luggage for active women like herself and even helped launch 2 airlines. Eventually, she married George Putnam. She also continued to fly. She tested new aircraft on cross-country flights, flew in contests, and set records for long-distance flights. By the time she was 39 years old, Amelia had made every major flight there was, except for one. She wanted a new challenge. The greatest challenge left was to fly around the world. Only one a man had ever flown around the world, several years before, but he had not followed the equator, the longest and most difficult route. This was the route Amelia would fly. Would she make it? By this time, no one adopted Amelia Earhart's flying skill. On May 21, 1937, she took off with her navigator, Fred Noonan. She went from Oakland, California to Miami, Florida in a new silver Lockheed Electra. It was the first leg of her flight around the world. Last flight. Amelia and Fred first stopped the Electra in Miami, Florida. The new plane had crossed the entire North American continent, passing its first test. They started the route around the equator that George Putnam, Amelia's husband, and carefully planned. Each stop was uneventful. They flew to South America, Africa, India, Asia, and Australia. It appeared that Amelia Earhart would once again pull off a historic flight without a hitch. On June 29, 1937, they stopped at La New Guinea, an island in the Pacific just north of Australia. There, Amelia and Fred enjoyed their usual routine. They fueled the airplane and checked their maps. They sent telegrams back to the United States. When they took off from Lae, there was no hint of any trouble to come. As they neared Noland Island, the next stop, their radio messages became odd. The tiny island was to be their last stop before Hawaii and then back to California. The U.S. Coast Guard cutter Itasca waited offshore to receive the Electra's radio signals and help it find the island. Those radio signals were patchy and strange. It seemed that Amelia could not hear the Itasca Itasca's messages. She spoke of a storm, yet the weather over the island was clear. More than 20 hours into the flight, Amelia's voice said, "We are running north and south." She was never heard from again. What happened to Amelia? This question still haunts people today. The Itasca, along with the U.S. Navy, began searching for Amelia's plane immediately. The Navy thought she may have gone down in a storm to the northwest of Howland Island. The search continued for weeks. No sign of the plane, Amelia or Fred was found. After a year of searching, Amelia's husband, George Putnam, concluded that she had perished at sea. But is that the full story? Many people have tried to explain what happened to Amelia. Some think Amelia and Fred survived an emergency landing and were picked up by a Japanese ship. They were kept as prisoners on a Japanese island and later died of disease. Others think about Amelia landed the plane but at a different island. There, she and Fred were able to live on native foods but eventually died for either disease or old ages. Many think those theories are just made up. They believe the most likely answer is that the plane landed in the water. It would have quickly broken apart in the fierce waves, over 10 feet 3 meters high. Perhaps before Amelia and Fred could have inflated their life raft, they drowned. Whatever her fate, there is no doubt that Amelia Earhart is one of the greatest Americans of the 20th century. She died doing what she loved most. She showed everyone that women didn't have to live with limits. She showed people that anyone could fly. She changed the world. She was a legend.